This channel does not promote or encourage any illegal activities. All contents provided by this channel is meant for educational purpose only.
Exploitation and post-exploitation with Armitage. In this video, we will be exploring the process of exploiting target systems as well as performing the various post-exploitation techniques that we've explored previously with Armitage. And of course, we're going to be continuing from where we left off in the previous video by exploiting victim 1 and then of course pivoting on to victim 2. All right, so again, all you need to do is just resume the lab environment, and again, we'll pick up from where we left off, and I'll see you within the lab environment. All right, so I'm back where we actually left off, and let's get started by taking a look at how we can exploit victim 1. So if we right click on it, on victim 1, and we click on services, you can see that we can exploit the Rigetto HTTP file server running on port 80. So in order to do that, we search for the module. So we're going to say search Rigetto, and we can then click on it. There we are. And we can then resize this particular menu as we did previously. So I'm just going to resize it. This can be a bit buggy at times, but there we are. So the options that we need to specify are the lhost option, which is already specified for us, and the lport option. In this case, I'll change the lport to 4444, and we don't need to set any other information apart from the target IP, which is set for us, and the target port, which is set correctly. In this case, we want to use a reverse connection, so we're going to click on use a reverse connection there and hit launch. I'm going to close up the services tab. As you can see, it sets all the options for the Rigetto HFS exploit module, and it says right over here, payload request received, sending the stage, and we get a Metasploit session. Now, once you've exploited the system, you'll see under your actual host's pane here, that the system is now red, or rather the borders of the monitor are now red, and they have a little electricity lines around it, which means that that system has been exploited. So that's the difference between a standard, between the standard view that we had previously and an exploited system. It's going to be again covered with the little electricity lines, or the actual visualization of electricity, as well as having the border turned to red. All right, and then it gives us all the information that you typically associate with an exploited system, like the host name, the user that we currently have access to, etc., etc. Right? So we have successfully exploited that system. I'll close the exploit tab here, and if we right click on it, you'll now see that we have a few new windows like login, which again we actually explored previously, which allows you to perform pass the hash attack with PSExec, or to essentially log in legitimately with PSExec. And then you have Metasploit, right? So this is Metasploit session 1. You can essentially access the system or utilize the Metasploit functionality in regards to access to escalate your privileges, steal a token, dump hashes through various methods like the LSAS method, which again will pretty much utilize the hash dump command through the registry or through wdigest. You can also set up persistence and pass the session. In terms of interaction, you can open up a command shell or a Metasploit shell or VNC through RDP. So for example, if we wanted a Metasploit shell, we could click on that, and there we are. It opens up Metasploit 1 for us. So you can do what you typically do if you had a Metasploit session. So I can say sysinfo, give that a few seconds to give you the output. There we are. I can say get user ID. There we are. Fantastic. I can then say get system, hit enter, and it says we got the system via technique 1. So we should have administrative privileges. So if I say get UID now, we have an NT authority system. I can then say hash dump, the typical techniques associated with post-exploitation. Hash dump, as you can see, it says operation failed, the parameter is incorrect. So we can probably try and do that again using the access option, and we can say dump hashes via LSAS. Let's see if that fails. It says, yep, that looks like it failed. So Metasploit access dump hashes via the registry. And we can set the get system option to 1, and session is 1. So we hit launch. It's going to run it as a background object, or as a background job, and it looks like we get a few errors here in regards to dumping the hashes, but we get the administrator hash right over here. So you can see that that is fairly simple, and you can utilize all the techniques in terms of dumping your hashes through one single click, which is fantastic. So again, if we list out, if we go to view here, and if we click on loot, you can see that will store the loot here. These are your Windows hashes, and it will actually save the hash for you, so you can always access it whenever you want, which is fantastic. So all of your data is being stored within the Metasploit Framework database. I'm just going to close these windows because we're done with them. I'll leave the Meterpreter session 1 open here. And if we click on Meterpreter, you can see that that's how you typically perform, the post-exploitation techniques like dumping hashes. If we click on persist, that will allow you to, again, set up persistence through the Windows registry. So again, you can configure the options there if you want. The module that we used was persistence via the actual, we actually utilized the persistence service. Let me just minimize this and close this window right over here. Let me open up Armitage again. There we are. So again, you can also search for and execute modules manually if you want. So I can say persistent. There we are, persistence, and under Windows I can actually sort through it based on operating system. You can see we have the persistence service module here, and I can also run that if I want. In this case we're not going to do that, but because we're primarily dealing with Armitage and I'm taking you through the process of utilizing it. If we click on explore, you have the ability to browse the files, show the processes, log keystrokes, key logging as we explored, take a screenshot of the system, take a webcam shot if the system has a webcam, and you also have the post-exploitation modules that you can use on the target. So if I click on that, just give it a few seconds, as I said, and it will list out all the post-exploitation modules you can use based on operating system. So again, if I under gather, I can look for the Windows ones and utilize them. So there we are, Windows, and I can go through that if and when I wanted to run one. All right, so let's right click on it. Under explore, if we open up the browse files option here, you can see this will give us a graphical file browser, which is fantastic. And that allows us to upload a file, make a directory, list the drives. So if I list the drives here, you can see, again, just give that a few seconds. We only have the C drive there. I can then refresh, give that a couple of seconds. And if I click on the C drive, it'll take me to the root of the C drive. And in this case, it takes us to the following path. So we can actually navigate to the root of the C drive there. And there we are. So we can access the actual file system via a graphical user interface, which is so much better. So I can say users, administrator, desktop, and we have desktop.ini, etc., etc. And of course, I can upload a file, or I can right click on it. I can then download it. I can also execute it if it's an executable file. And then we have the timestamp option, which allows you to modify the actual attributes of a file, and you can also delete it. So the file browser is really fantastic. So going back into Explore, as I said, we also have the ability to show the processes. So give that a few seconds and it'll give you a graphical, a graphical perspective or a graphical view of all the processes that are currently running. Now, the great thing that you can do here is you can steal a token from a process. So I can click on a particular process here. I can steal the token. I can inject into that process. I can also migrate to that process or kill it, which is great, right? So that's how to play around with the processes. If we click on Meterpreter again and we head over to Explore, we have the ability to take a screenshot. So if I take a screenshot, it'll open it up here and it'll give you the ability to actually, again, go through it and see what's actually running on the system. And we can see that on the target system, HFS is currently running, right? So you can essentially just scroll through the entire image. There we are. And I'll close that up. If we click on view and click on loot, and yeah, we still have our hashes there, which is great. And if we click on maybe, let's see, downloads, there we go. That will allow you to essentially display all the files that you've downloaded from a target system. All right, so under Meterpreter, we've taken a look at the Explore options. You also have the pivoting option, which is great as it automatically adds the subnet for you and the net mask for the subnet. So if I click on pivoting and I say set up pivoting, it'll open up a window and says add pivot. And as you can see, it adds the subnet for you and the net mask here for the subnet, and it adds it correctly. So we can click on add pivot here, and it's going to say expected session got MSF sessions Meterpreter x86 Windows. So let's try and click on that again. We might have to migrate to a 64-bit process. So we'll say pivoting setup, and we set add pivot, and it's going to say route already exists. So it looks like it's added that for us, which is great. All right, so now that we've added our route, we can begin pivoting by adding the second host. So I can go into the actual IP lists here, and we can click on victim machine 2, right? And we can click on copy, and we say add host. So host, add host, and we can say Control V, hit add. There we are. Give that a few seconds, and as you can see, the host has been added in this case. And again, there's no information regarding it, so we can right click on it and hit scan, and it's going to perform a port scan using the auxiliary port scanner here, or the auxiliary module. That's the TCP port scanner. So there we are, it's performing the port scan. I'm just going to wait for this to complete. All right, so the port scanner module is complete. Let's also set a label for this particular host. So I'm going to set a label, and we'll say this is victim 2 so that we can identify it. There we are, victim 2. Hit OK. Right, and that's added. And let's see if we can, whether pivoting is currently set up. So I'm going to say pivoting setup. There we are, add a pivot. Route already exists. All right, so that's done. So what we need to do now is perform a port scan with Nmap on this system, primarily on port 80, because that's where the vulnerable service is running. So if we click on services here, let's see whether it's actually been able to identify that, because the Nmaps, or rather the port scan is actually done. For some reason, it's not actually displaying the actual services. So let's click on services again. There we are, still nothing. So we can probably perform a port scan again. So I'm just going to search for the port scan module, and we can probably do that manually. There we are, and make sure that the target IP is specified. There we are, that's 0.140. And for the port range, we'll just set this to 100 to save time, and hit launch. And we'll close the previous scan here. And hopefully that should add all of that information into the services tab, or into the services for that particular host. There we are, that's port 80 open. So if we click on services, it looks like that information is still, yeah, there we are. We can see port 80 is currently open. Fantastic. So again, I'm just going to wait for this scan to complete. There we are. Looks like it is complete. So again, if you ever have issues with it not working, don't worry about that. Armitage can be slightly buggy at times with displaying output or enumerating the information that you've essentially gathered. So there we are. Now, given the fact that we cannot access this target system, externally or using our current IP, we can only access it via victim 1. We can only perform the Nmap scan on the target system on port 80 in order to identify the vulnerable service via or using the port forwarding technique, as we did using during the pivoting video. So I'll open up a Meterpreter session here, or the Meterpreter session that we previously had, and I'm going to say port forward. We're going to perform port forwarding here, and I'm going to add a route, or the actual port that I want to forward the remote port on. So I'm going to say I want to forward the remote port 80 onto our local port 1234, and the remote port is going to be 80, and then of course we specify the target or the remote address that we're performing this port forwarding on. So I'll copy victim 2, there we are, and I'll paste it in there, and I hit enter. It's going to say TCP relay created, which is great. So we've added port forwarding. We can now perform the Nmap scan. So I'm just going to close these two tabs here. And what I'll do is we can go into our console here and say db_nmap and say sv. The port is 1234. And this is on localhost because, again, we have performed the port forwarding. So we'll hit enter. That's going to perform the Nmap scan, and we should be able to identify the vulnerable service. So we'll give this a couple of seconds. while that is actually completing, if we right click on the actual targets pane here, we have the ability to sort. So you can essentially take a look at auto layout. We can sort it via in the form of a circle, which again can be very useful. And we can also sort it in the form of a hierarchy as well as a stack. And I'll leave it as the circle because that looks much better. And then for the layout, you have your circle. You then have your hierarchy, and of course you then have the stack, right? You can also zoom in and out, so we can say maybe, well, let's return this to hierarchy here. Apply layout to stack. Will that work? And we can just zoom in so we can see what's going on. There we are. And we currently have localhost added as a host there because we performed the scan. And given that the scan is complete, you can see that the forwarded port here tells us that the target is victim 2 is running bad blue version 2.7 on port 80. So again, we've already explored how to exploit this. So I'm going to search for the exploit module here. So bad blue, and we can remove that host. So you can right click on a host and remove the host if you want. And that's of course localhost, so there's no issue there. And we're utilizing the bad blue pass-through exploit. So we'll open that up. Just going to drag this here, and hopefully I can enlarge the pane here. There we are. So I'll leave the L port as is, and then for the L host, that is fine. We need to set up the R host option. So I'll copy victim 2's IP address here, and we'll paste it in here. So there we are. Click on that, paste it in there, and you can then use a reverse connection. In this case, we'll not use a reverse connection. And as you can see, we have the ability to specify the target. We do know that victim 2 is running Enterprise Edition 2.7 Universal. So we'll click on that target and then hit launch. And let's see whether we're able to get a session on victim 2. All right, so there we are. It looks like it starts it as a background job. So it's saying trying target bad blue Enterprise Edition 2.7. And let's give that a couple of seconds. There we are. It looks like we get a bind TCP handler. And we get the Meterpreter session on the target system. So let me just zoom in so we can see that clearly. It's going to send the stage, and after a few seconds, you can see that it's highlighted there as exploited because you can see the electricity, the actual visualized electricity around the red monitor. And it looks like we have a Meterpreter session on the target system, which is fantastic. So what we can do now, if we right click on it, we have the ability to log in via, the typical methods associated as we explored previously. And then under Meterpreter session 2, I can pretty much do what I did before. I can elevate my privileges, steal a token, dump the hashes, persist this particular session on the target. Under interact, I can open up a Meterpreter shell. Let's actually do that now. And I'll zoom in here. And we can then say sysinfo. There we are. And if I say get use ID, attack defense administrator, and then I can say get system if I wanted to. There we are, got system via technique 1. And in this case, it's not added the Windows logo here, so we can actually do that ourselves. We can set the operating system to Windows, and this is Windows Server 2016. So we're going to click on the 8RT option there, and it should add the image there. Fantastic. And then of course you have the ability to drag around your hosts, and of course they'll be sorted based on the actual layout. So we'll set the auto layout to none, and we can then drag it here if we want. And you can then drag your hosts around based on the way you want to sort them. So I can drag victim 1 there, victim 2 there, etc., right? So it's fairly easy to navigate around the interface here. So that's how to essentially perform exploitation and post-exploitation. So again, we've actually been able to elevate our privileges. So if I say get use ID, anti-authority system, hash dump, there we are. It looks like that fails for some reason. So I can click on Meterpreter under access and dump hashes. We can try the wdigest option this time. So session is set to 2, hit launch. And it says x64 platform requires an x64 Meterpreter session. So yep, we'll need to elevate this session. So we can right click on that under Meterpreter, under access, or sorry, under interact, under explore, we can click on show processes. And we can then migrate this to a 64-bit process. So I'll look for explorer.exe here. Hopefully I can find it. Let's see if I can find that here. We can probably do this faster manually using MSF console or the Meterpreter session, if you will, because I can't find the actual process ID here for Explorer. But if we find it, I can actually migrate into explorer.exe, which will consequently give us a 64-bit Meterpreter session. It looks like I can actually see it here. I think I saw it somewhere here. But yeah, we can use Meterpreter and say pgrep explorer 3600. We can then say migrate into the process ID 3600. Hit enter. It's going to migrate. And if we now say sysinfo, we'll wait for that to actually migrate successfully, and then it'll execute the sysinfo command. So give that a couple of seconds. As I said, it's best to execute one function at a time. There we are. So it's now a 64-bit Meterpreter session. So maybe under interact, under access, we can click on dump hashes and maybe try the wdigest module now. So there we are, running the wdigest module, and we get an error with that particular module. So let's get rid of that there, and I'll close the tabs I'm not using, as that can get quite confusing at times. Under access, dump hashes, we can try the LSAS method. Yep, so there we are. We get the hashes of all the users on the system, administrator, student, etc., as we did during the pivoting video. All right, now in this particular case, it's not actually showing the pivoting arrow, primarily because there might be an issue with this interface. But previously, or whenever you're using Armitage, it'll actually show you once you've performed a pivot, there's a green arrow between the two systems showing you that you actually pivoted. So if I click on Meterpreter here and I say pivoting and I say maybe set up, it'll tell me that that's already set up. But for some reason, it's telling me the route already exists and is not adding that there. For the layout, we can maybe go for a circle layout. Let's see if that changes anything. No, it doesn't. So again, we'll just go to auto layout and set that to none. And we can probably drag victim 1 there or victim 2 here. So again, you can drag around the systems as you wish. And yeah, you can pretty much perform any of the other, post-exploitation techniques like setting up persistence, dumping the hashes as we've just done, also accessing the system via RDP or using PSExec to authenticate legitimately. So again, what we can do is if we click on view and we click on loot or credentials, let's click on credentials here. Doesn't look like if we click on loot, that's only displaying the hashes from victim 1, which is weird because we were able to identify or get the hashes, but it doesn't look like it saved them within the loot, or it doesn't look like it saved them as loot within the Metasploit Framework database. So if we right click on victim 2, we can dump the hashes using another technique here. So we go into access, we can say dump hashes through LSAS, or we can also again use wdigest as we did for victim 1. So access, dump hashes, wdigest, session 2, launch. And it looks like we still get the error. And in this case, we'll probably not get that saved under loot, which is fine in this case because we still were able to get the hashes and we can probably save these hashes manually. All right, so that is how to perform exploitation and post-exploitation with Armitage. And that is going to conclude the practical demonstration side of this video. All right, that is going to conclude the final section of this course. Thank you very much for taking your time to go through this entire course. We hope you've learned a lot about the Metasploit framework, how it works and how it can be used to perform a penetration test. And hopefully, as you now complete this course, you'll have the skills necessary to utilize the Metasploit framework, to conduct your own penetration tests. And thank you once again for going through this. We would love to hear what you guys think of this course and any ways that you'd like us to improve. And I'll be seeing you in the next course. Thank you.